done 2 ships in 1 week. This is a lot of ship we're dealing with this week. Now, specifically, we've got a great guest on today. I've been chatting with him pre-show. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with him. Very smart and very entertaining guy called Andrew Gazdecki. Andrew is the CEO and founder of a firm called MicroAcquire. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about in a moment, and I wish had existed when I was doing one of my last startups. He's also the former CEO and founder of Business Apps, which he started in college and ended up selling. He's the CEO and founder of altcoin.io, which he also exited. But today we're going to lean in a lot more around his current company, MicroAcquire. And what they do is they help entrepreneurs basically buy and sell startups in a marketplace format. And the firm has quite literally helped hundreds of startups get acquired. And I believe I saw they facilitated over 500 million in closed deals. In fact, actually, moments before the show today, he actually just tweeted out that in October, they did around 47 million in closed startup acquisitions. That's up from 46 million in September and about over 174 million in just the last 4 months. So huge congrats to Andrew and the MicroAcquire team. And so one of the things that makes his story so interesting is that, not only is a serial entrepreneur, but he's effectively bootstrapped his way into these life-changing acquisitions. And so, when you then take the fact that he's got a company that helps other CEOs, whether they bootstrapped or not, find their own path to acquisition, I think that Andrew has kind of a very unique perspective on really what it takes to achieve this and make it possible. So we're going to pick Andrew's brain. I encourage you, if you've got questions, to ask in chat, whether you're watching live or after the show. Thanks so much. And here we go with another week of Oh Ship. Andrew, welcome to Oh Ship. How are you?
Hey, Freddie. Thanks so much for having me on the show. Excited to be here.
My pleasure. So, I tried to do your very cool background justice, but I didn't want to steal your thunder. And I think it'd be really great if we could help some of the audience who maybe hasn't met you or hasn't heard about you before understand a little bit about kind of where you got your start as a quite prolific serial entrepreneur.
Yeah, I would say I've kind of been an entrepreneur my whole life. I was that strange kid who had an eBay store when I was like 14. I did all the cliche stuff like selling Pokemon cards when everyone was collecting them. And I think my real first entrepreneurial venture, if you will, was I created a job board in college. It was called something really lame, like Phone Freelancer. It was called phonefreelancer.com, and it helped mobile developers connect with businesses. And then I sold that, and that eventually led to Business Apps, which was a startup I ran for about 10 years, and then exited that when I was 29. But I started early. Some kids want to be like the quarterback of a professional football team. I fell in love with business early, I guess you could say. I got lucky.
Out of interest, was it in your family? Were there other entrepreneurs, or were you the first entrepreneur of the family?
Good question. So I grew up in a town called San Clemente, and so I didn't really come from too much. Not like woe is me or anything like that, but
Yeah, I
San
understand.
Clemente is it's like a wealthy area. And
Yes.
so all my friends, like when they, were, living in these huge houses and stuff like that, I always wondered like, how do you get that? Like, how do and so I think just seeing that level of wealth growing up, made me just kind of think, I don't know,
How do you do that?
can I
Yeah,
get
yeah,
there? How do you get
yeah.
there? And so, that kind of drove me into, business, really just to, for a lot of people, entrepreneurship and startups is glamorous and it's cool to do. For me, it was like a survival mechanism. Like
Mhm.
if I wanted a skateboard, I had to go out and figure out a way to make money to buy one. So
Yeah,
that's
I
kind of how I
respect that.
landed in there.
And when I was a kid, my mom always used to tell the story of how when I asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I was telling people that I wanted to be a businessman. I wasn't very specific about what type of business, but apparently I always wanted to be a businessman. You know, one of the dangers to being an entrepreneur, I think, is especially in America, entrepreneurialism, the American dream. It's such a core part of U.S. culture, but I also think there's a lot of things like TechCrunch and so on that can really glamorize what it means to be like a tech CEO. But it's hard. I don't think people realize it's far hard. You get these shining moments, but it's a really hard racket, so to speak. And I don't think people realize quite how hard it's going to be when they start.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And I think, when you really think about just what the reality of entrepreneurship is, like hundreds of thousands of startups are being created every single year. And then out of that, I think it's 0.5% raise venture capital. And so there's this huge, and then out of that, just 1% will reach a $1 billion, I hate this term, but unicorn status. And so if you just think about those numbers, the reality for entrepreneurships and startups is a lot different than what you read about in the media. It's not just $1 billion outcomes. It's not $100 million raises. There's, quite literally thousands of people all over the world building quiet, profitable businesses. And to me, I think that's awesome. That's what entrepreneurship is in my mind. It's a lot less sexy and glamorous than, you read in the press.
But because I knew it would be impossible for us to get through this chat without mentioning unicorns, I did decide to keep my unicorn themed coffee mug today. And I think most of the unicorn stuff, as you know, there's a lot of fluff and BS there, which is why my cup says powered by unicorn farts, which is how I feel about most of the unicorn statuses out there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think it's a big achievement if you can get there, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs, think that's the definition of success with startups, and I think it could be further. You don't need to build a $1 billion company to be successful as an
build a
entrepreneur.
great business. Yeah, I think so. We're going to lean into that, but I want to go back in time a little bit first. So, um, the first notable success that I think you've been working with different businesses, but business apps was kind of the first big business that you exited from. And I read that you had only pulled in about 100K of equity investment. I assume that you bootstrapped a big chunk of it. I'd love to, certainly at the earlier stages, I'd love to see what you think is the key to scaling basically a business with little or no capital.
Yeah, with little to no capital. So one metric that we'd always track at business apps, and for those that don't know what business apps, and you probably don't, but business apps was a do-it-yourself mobile app builder. So we helped small businesses create native iOS and Android applications. And candidly, we kind of got lucky. I was 21 when I started it. I had some unique insights from the job board I described to you around what people wanted in their mobile applications. But one metric that we would track religiously when bootstrapping business apps, and we did only raise that 100K, but it was customer payback period. So basically, we land a customer. How long would it take for us to be net positive? So for some venture backed businesses, you can afford to have a customer payback period of 18 months or more, 24
Mhm.
months, but we couldn't. So we had to try to keep that under 30 days, and we'd average around like 20 to, I think 28 days was the number that we would. So essentially, every time a customer signs up, we were profitable with that customer within 28 days. And so that allowed us to aggressively reinvest into the business to scale the business. And the second thing I'd add is you want a nonlinear growth strategy. And what I mean by that is distribution is so important, and we couldn't afford to hire a giant sales team. So the way that we scaled business apps was, and this was actually feedback from a customer. It's a funny story. Long story short, there's this guy in Switzerland who made a few apps for hotels, and I called him just because I thought he owned the hotels and I wanted to talk to a rich person. And I don't know, I thought it was, you own hotels, like maybe you can teach me something. And what he told me was he actually was building the apps for his hotel clients that he had built websites for, and he managed their social media accounts and stuff like that. And so we pivoted towards a white label reseller model where instead of selling one mobile app to one small business at a time, we would partner with web agencies, and then towards the tail end of business apps, even public companies and kind of all the do-it-yourself website. But anyone that was selling to small businesses, we'd rebrand our software so they can offer it as a solution to their customers,
White
set their own
labeling.
price point.
Mm,
Yeah, white labeling. And so we
mm.
had, I think, at our peak, 5,000 partners in
Wow.
50, 60 different countries. We translate our product into 20 different languages. And at the peak of business apps, one in every 20 iPhone apps created was created on the business apps platform. So we were
It's
the
amazing.
number one producer of iOS apps, to my knowledge, at least.
Wow, that's amazing. And then if you kind of take this through the lens of MicroAcquire, not specific to the work that you've done to build that business, but through the lens of seeing so many businesses now, pass through that company. What advice would you give people that are running their own businesses, basically? Do you think, say, hey, this is what you should focus on if you're trying to bootstrap? Where should their focus be to scale a business when they haven't got a bunch of cash to run with, basically?
Yeah, that's a good question. My best advice is always to focus on just what you enjoy. I think when you work on stuff that, and I know that's kind of a cop out answer, but when you focus on stuff you enjoy, you're going to be good at it. So it's really hard to force yourself to be good at sales if you're not good at sales. It's hard to force yourself to be good at marketing if you're not good at marketing, but you might be a fantastic, social media person that can really craft a story, or maybe going podcasts like this is a great way to get the word out about your business. So I'd really focus on figuring out what is that channel. Maybe it's SEO, maybe it's building a YouTube channel. There's so many different options and distribution channels that just weren't available a decade ago. I
Mhm.
would figure out which one you enjoy the most and you can consistently show up at and maybe have some sort of unique advantage just because you're good at it, you enjoy it. And then I'd go all in on that distribution channel, own it before moving on to other ones.
It's interesting. So I also it's not a cop out. You get a pass because I also I've told quite a few people over the years, like, do what you love and do what you enjoy, and and so I would argue that part of the success that, at least applying when I think of my own career and some of the other people that I've watched over the years. Yeah, I'm not convinced I was always the smartest guy in the room. I was definitely willing to work harder than anyone else, and the reason I was willing to work harder was because I loved it. And so it's easy to put the hours in when you're passionate about what you're doing. um, Now, when you think about like scaling a startup, though, a lot of, especially with tech SaaS startups, which I know an area you have some expertise in, a lot of times the early founders are the product guy, the product person, I should really say, so whoever the developer is, and maybe they're engineering focused. And to your quote, like maybe they don't love selling or they don't love marketing. Should they hire for that, or should they find a partner that loves that thing like they love their thing?
I think that's a great question. I think, that is kind of like the kiss of death for a lot of startups is, they have a really good focus on product, but they kind of build in an echo chamber where they never build a sales process or marketing process. And, you need both to succeed. And so to be frank, I'm not a technical founder. I don't know how our servers work. Like I
Mm,
pass those keys off to other members of our team at MicroAcquire.
mm,
So marketing and sales have always kind of come natural to me. So if I was a product focused founder, but I've learned to manage product is probably my
mhm,
bigger point. So I think the best thing you could do as a founder is invest in yourself and just try and learn sales and marketing. Yeah, you can, if you can find a co-founder, I think that's great. I definitely don't recommend starting out and hiring someone, because what you want to do is you want to understand how that role works. What is the sales process? And when you do that, when you go out to hire, even if you go out to find a co-founder, just having a little bit of information on these are kind of like the value props that really stick or stand out. That allows you to really ensure you're hiring the right person, and you can kind of give them a leg up on finding the sales process. Because I think it's kind of a unicorn role when it's like, I built a great product. Can you help me figure out how to sell it? It's like the person that can do that is, oh, the founder is always best suited, in my opinion. So it's hard to hire, and I worry that founders that try to do that will just spend just as much time as a sales and marketing founder trying to find a technical CTO founder, if you've heard of those sort of debates.
I find myself wondering about this stuff a lot as well, and when people, if you can find a great founder, awesome, more a co-founder, more power to you. I think a lot of times people, though, you'll have like a dominant founder and then co-founders, and then the co-founders have they're committed, but maybe they don't stick around that commitment as long in the long run, and then it creates complexities in the cap table later if you've got partners that weren't leaning in as much as maybe one smaller subset of original founders. It can be tricky, and especially when you start dealing with like sales folks and so on. Obviously you're a charismatic guy that's able to sell your products, but I think a lot of sales and marketing focus, folks out there are more sizzle than steak, because it's a harder, sometimes can be a harder thing to measure. I'd love to ask you. Bootstrapping is a kind of a big theme that I want to have come through today, and when you start thinking about bootstrapping, what is the best part of bootstrapping and the worst part of bootstrapping?
The best part is you get to keep the majority of your equity, and when you go to
I
sell
love
your
that.
business, it's substantially easier. You know, as your business grows, ironically, the buyer pool for who can actually buy your business goes down. It's logical. Like any sort of high value asset, there's just less buyers available. And this applies to like $1 billion companies. There's like 20 other companies that are able to pay that much money for your business. And so, and as an entrepreneur, I think people forget just how life changing an acquisition for five or one or two or three or four, whatever million, it doesn't have to be, you don't need to sell your business for $100 million to be super happy and feel successful. The only thing that's going to change is you might get another house and your car might be a little faster. So that's the best part, is just the flexibility to have control over, selling your business for, $5 million, and then that can be truly life changing. And then the downside is, I mean, gosh, you got to scratch and claw for every customer and every hire. At business apps, we had a saying, we only hired when it hurt, and it hurt a lot,
Mhm.
because everyone has to basically do a lot more than you typically would. You're just basically understaffed the entire journey. So, and then it can be harder to like I could keep going, but I'd say the biggest one is, you can feel understaffed essentially the whole ride.
Mhm. One of the things I like about bootstrapping is that scratching for every clawing and scratching for every moment to be successful. I think that breeds focus. And so I think there's something that, like, or at least the successful ones, I think if your resources are limited, it really it should force you to, like, be more resolute and focused in the actions you take, because you haven't got room to screw up. You haven't got room to be loosey goosey about stuff. Obviously, once you start making positive cash flow and you've got excess money, then you can do what you like. But I think in the earliest days, that can be something that people really need. I don't want to project my own mistakes too badly, but I can say, like, with the company where I raised money, I felt like I could scale so quickly because I had all this cash to play with, and that actually I didn't make me as focused as I wanted to be. Have you ever seen that kind of behavior before, or any reaction to that in general?
Yeah, definitely. And on your first point, I could completely agree. I
Mhm.
always say, sometimes building on a budget can build a better product because the
Mhm.
constraints really force creativity. You're going to think, twice about adding an extra feature or launching this ad campaign. You're going to track because you have to. You don't have like 4 years of runway or 2 year, whatever it may be. You have probably like 2 months. So like every month is kind of like, you're definitely not overspending. So you're in effect building an extremely capital efficient business, which I think will bode really, really well over the next couple years. So if you can do it, I think it's the way to go, depending on what you're trying to get out of a startup. And then related to your second question, I view venture capital just as a tool, and that tool is a very dangerous tool. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of founders raise venture capital not knowing what it really is. And it's basically rocket fuel. And if you build a rocket and it's not ready to have all that fuel injected into it, it's just going to blow up. Like you're just going
Yeah,
to, the typical like, all right, let's go. And it just explodes. And so if you do raise venture capital, I always recommend, just try bootstrapping first so you can, validate the business. You can command a higher valuation when you do raise. You'll have a lot more insight into where to allocate the capital, or you just might not want to because,
yeah.
you have things going well
Mhm.
at your business. But I think too many entrepreneurs, think it makes things easier when in actuality it can usually make things a lot harder. And a
Yeah,
lot of great businesses that are funded could be awesome, 10, $20 million outcomes, but they go to zero because
yeah.
they had to go for the, multi 100 million or $1 billion outcome.
Yeah, I love the analogy. By the way, I think that's again just my reflecting on my own life. That perfectly summarizes what I did. My rocket ship wasn't ready, and I pumped a ton of rocket fuel into it. And if I had gone back in time, I would have bootstrapped it in the beginning and then done it afterwards. So great advice. Um, I'd like to so in a moment I want to kind of jump over to more specific stuff around MicroAcquire and some of the learnings you've had there. But I've got one kind of more key question first. Um, if you A lot of times the successful people that I've chatted with over the years, both before Oship and now with this web series, I find that they can kind of look back at their career, and there's a moment when it kind of flips. So maybe that was during your business apps years, but there was a moment when it was like, yeah, this thing happened, and then whether that's the rocket ship took off or it was gave you this moment of credibility that made everything else easier after it. Is there a moment like that out of interest in your career where you feel like this was like a key pivotal moment for you?
Yeah, I can think of two. I got to give a shout out to an individual named Christian Freeland. He started a company called build.com. It
Mhm.
basically is one of the largest e-commerce companies. Think Home Depot, Lowe's online if you want to buy anything for home repair. And he grew that to a few billion in GMV and never raised any outside capital and sold the business. But he was my first angel investor, and he was essentially my business mentor. And when I say business mentor, like sometimes you talk to investors like once a month or something like that. We would talk like every day. Like the amount that he
Amazing.
I think he invested like 75K or something like that. But he gave me millions in terms of just his time, and he just really I just owe, I think, a lot of my success to him. So I want to give him a shout out. And then in terms of just inflection points at business apps, the story I told you. So before we pivoted to a white label model, we were cold calling small businesses, and we would say, "Hey, what's your mobile app strategy?" And they'd be like, "What? Mobile appetizers? Is that what you're looking for?" And this is in 2010, so apps and those words just didn't really, connect.
Yeah,
And so I don't if we didn't make that pivot, and as soon as we did, we just started growing like crazy. And so
yeah.
those two moments stick out to me immediately.
That's awesome. Little known fact for even some of my old friends, the original inspiration. So before Chameleon Collective, I had this company called iChameleon, and the reason that iChameleon was actually the name of a white label ISP product. And I can't tell you like how much I believe in the white labeling model. I don't think enough people use this as like a partnership structure to get out there. And at the end of the day, you're tapping into, effectively, if we were to use like today's terms like social capital, social credibility, you're tapping into that of another brand and their audience. And if you can use that to scale, it's a super super effective method. And great, by the way, anyone who's tuning in, whether you're tuning in via YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, any of the other platforms, again, please feel free to leave comments or ask questions, and we're happy to address them on the air. Andrew, I want to change gears a little bit. So we mentioned MicroAcquire. I gave a little bit of a setup for it, but for people maybe just tuning in now, can you both re-summarize what MicroAcquire does, and then I'd really love to hear what inspired you to start the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So MicroAcquire is a marketplace to buy and sell startups. And to date, we've helped well over 1 billion in terms of facilitating
Wow.
closed. Yeah, kind of
Got
wild
to
to even
update that
admit it.
website, man. I quoted 500 million.
Yeah, I know it even surprises me because originally I didn't think the idea would work. A marketplace where you can sell your business for millions of dollars. And Um, so I started the business just really out of kind of scratching my own itch after
Yeah.
selling business apps. Kind of the aha moment was I had so many of my friends that were running other startups reach out to me and say, like, how did you sell your business? What was due diligence? What was the legal part like? Are you still alive? Like, and I just thought, okay, we have all these books on like fundraising, marketing, sales, but there was really no education around, the most important part of the founder's journey, which a lot of the times is the exit. And so I just saw this huge void in the startup ecosystem where there needed to be an easier way to sell your business outside of hiring an investment bank or a business broker. And so that was the inspiration. It really was just, it started with meager, or I should say, just really just to try and help entrepreneurs sell their businesses. And it's since expanded into something that I didn't expect, but obviously, I think we have a lot more room ahead of us. But
Is
yeah, just scratching my own itch and just, building the thing I wish I had. Because when I sold business apps and also altcoin,
Yeah.
finding the buyer was just so hard, and then going through the process and understanding the terms was difficult. So just our goal and our vision for the company is to standardize and streamline and just make acquisitions super easy for, startups all across the globe, not just in the
I
United
do think
States.
there's something particularly poetic about, I believe you said that your first business was technically selling Pokemon cards on eBay. So you have actually gone from your first role in marketplaces back to marketplaces again. So it really shows how some of the things you do at the earliest parts of your career can still really drive what you're doing now. And frankly, echoing your sentiment about wishing you had that business. Again, my third company, Guide, which failed, and it was a hard ending for that business. I feel like if MicroAcquire had been around, like we had great tech and a really good team, like there was value there, but I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to, how to take a company at that size and that scale that maybe hadn't quite nailed its product market fit, but still had value, to get someone else to buy it. And so I'd love to understand, when you look at MicroAcquire today, like, what kind of people are selling their companies? Does it have to be somebody who's like, yeah, I'm crushing it, I'm knocking out 40% EBITDA, and I've got $1 million a month run rates, or could it be people that maybe haven't quite nailed it, but there's something of value there, or they believe there's a value there? I guess the market determines that, right? But
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of everything. Our sweet spot is definitely profitable SaaS
mhm,
companies. Those tend to be of highest demand, just given our buyer pool is comprised of private equity, family offices, venture-backed companies, public companies, and then a lot of first-time buyers that are looking to take over and scale a business that's been grown to a certain point by another entrepreneur. So it really depends, but we see kind of all of it. We see businesses selling for 10K, and we see businesses selling for 10 million, and then we
mhm,
see businesses that sell for 5 million, and it's a soft landing like you're describing.
mhm,
And then we see a bootstrap company where the owner has 100% equity in the business and they sell for 5 million, and then they're a millionaire. So we
mhm,
see kind of this really interesting of we like to say we see macro acquisitions and also micro acquisitions, and everything in between. So it's we see a lot of, and that's probably the most rewarding part about the business is these are like life changing events. If you're in a country where like a story I like to share is there's an individual who sold a company for 20K, and I believe he's in Pakistan. 20K in Pakistan goes, very, very long ways. And another one was there was a student who sold it was a platform that helped engineers pass coding interviews for the FANG companies like Google, Apple,
mhm,
Facebook, etc. And he sold that for 250,000. And then he wrote me the most heartfelt email of like, I'm paying off all my debt. I'm buying my mom like a house, basically.
mhm.
So people, all across the globe basically have access to, a massive buyer network, regardless of, the size of your business or your location. So I love sharing that aspect,
It's
but we
awesome.
do see acquisitions of all shapes and sizes.
One of the things, as you noted, when you start thinking about selling a company, it's complicated. There are a lot of things that the buyer is going to want to see, so they can feel confident that they're basically acquiring something that's been properly thought through and vetted and so on. And I think you could see some early stage companies, where maybe they've got great technology and a great platform, but maybe aren't super sophisticated on the business side, so they wouldn't necessarily know how to position themselves for sale normally. What kind of things is MicroAcquire doing to try and prep companies so that they're packaged up nicely so that buyers understand how to buy them, if that makes sense? Like, for example, I saw on Twitter the other day you mentioned like a P&L builder, that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, so I was just about to mention that. So probably the biggest feature that we've released, and we've had this for a while, but we made a huge upgrade where you can connect, Stripe or Paddle or ChargeBee, whatever your billing system is, to show your real financial metrics, because that's typically the first question most buyers have. And then we made a huge upgrade to that to where it's essentially a P&L builder that'll give a 36-month view of your revenue and your expenses. And
Mhm,
it's all anonymized. So it just gives kind of an accurate picture of, your true financials in terms of how much revenue are you making? Is it profitable? Are you losing money? And most startups don't have a clean 36-month P&L.
mhm,
So we're able to generate that quickly. And then let's say you do find a buyer. We have a letter of intent builder. We have an asset purchase agreement builder.
very cool.
We have a number of different materials like a data room that you can set
Mhm,
up within MicroAcquire. So all the things that you typically need. And then on top of that, resources and education on what are these things?
mhm,
What is a data room? What is a letter of
mhm.
intent? What is an asset purchase agreement? What is a P&L? Like if that's a
Yeah,
question.
it's a
So,
question for
you
some
know,
people.
So just as important, the tooling is important, but equally important in my mind is the education around, what are certain deal structures that are common, and what's a good way to negotiate against a letter of intent, what are terms to avoid, and everything that we do at MicroAcquire, we do in favor of the founder,
Yeah.
because we want to help founders maximize their exit. And so when they get to the table with, Mr. Private Equity, they feel more confident in terms of, knowing the lingo or what the process is or what due diligence is and what to expect, so they can really get the most out of selling their business. But we're trying to innovate across every single step of the seller's journey when you go to sell your business, from meeting the buyer to, again, due diligence, to the legal stuff, to transferring the assets, and then all the way to close and then post transition.
And out of interest, have you, by the way, I love how founder centric you are, and I think having these tools is huge for people. Have you ever spoke to any investment bankers about how they feel about MicroAcquire?
I have, yeah. Some are nice. Some kind of laugh at it in a nice way,
I suspect
because investment
they'll be
bankers.
eating crow in a couple of years. Anyone who snickered will regret those Snickers later down the road.
Yeah, it's all fun. It's just business. But one email that comes to mind is like, I remember investment banker signed up and it was like, laugh out loud, like, we do like $100 million deals. Good luck competing with something like that. That was kind of petty. And I just said, that's awesome. Like, I'm really happy for you. Um, but I think it's just kind of, when you start to get emails like that, I take it as a
Yeah.
compliment. It's just.
You seem like a great, easygoing dude, and I think those kind of things. It's not worth fighting people. The last laugh is spoken in action, and what the company does. So it's not worth getting pulled in that kind of thing. Um, I do. You mentioned earlier a moment ago some of the things you're doing to help founders. Um, what would be some of the most common mistakes that you've seen founders make during the acquisition process?
Yeah, I see quite a bit, but I'll give you the top three. The first one I would say is probably just overvaluing your startup.
Mm,
Like most SaaS companies, unfortunately, I'm sorry to tell this to founders, but it's not worth 10, 20 times annual recurring revenue
mhm,
unless you're Slack and you're growing like crazy or something like that. There's always exceptions, but generally, I'd recommend. We have a report that we release every 6 months on valuations and multiples that we're
mhm,
seeing on MicroAcquire. So I recommend checking that out if you're just curious about what your company could be worth. And then number two, just not being prepared.
mhm,
So what I mean by that is just, not having any sort of relevant information, because when you go to market, buyers are going to have some hard questions in terms of, it's kind of like Shark Tank, like, know your numbers. If you have a P&L, great. If you don't, use our P&L builder. So buyers can quickly assess if your business is an acquisition opportunity they want to pursue, and also just being transparent and honest.
mhm,
I think a lot of founders feel that they need to bring their business in like perfect presentation mode,
mhm,
but really, what you want to do, and this is kind of, counterintuitive, but it's perfectly okay to bring your business forward with like warts and all the stuff that's wrong with it.
mhm.
Because when buyers hear that, they hear and think of growth opportunities. And
Exactly
that's what
right.
most people are looking for,
Yeah,
is a business that, it's kind of like go inside a house and you're like, hey, that door is a
yeah,
hole
yeah,
in it. I don't know how to fix it. And you're like, oh, well, I fixed
yeah,
doors
yeah,
and I could fix that. And, so,
yeah. A lot
telling
of people
the,
don't realize this. That again, we work. I work almost every day with an investor, and when they're looking at potential acquisitions, if there's nothing to improve, how can they make money, right? So if something is reached its market cap and saturated the market and is a perfect business, what levers, right? So the investors are going, what levers can I adjust to keep growing this thing? And so the companies that they're most excited about, at least in the experience that I've got, and more broadly the collective has, is they look at it and go, hey, this is great. There's tons of market opportunity, stable product, good team. And man, if I went in there and did this, this, and this thing would, 5x, 10x. Like that's the stuff that the buyers really drool over, at least in my experience.
Yeah, no, I completely agree too. And there's nothing wrong with that too in terms of as a founder because I think as a founder you can sometimes only take a company so far, whether that's through your experience or just you lose interest in the business. Or it's just time to sell the business because you've taken it to 5 million in revenue and you're not the person to take it to 50 million in revenue or what have you. And yeah, like giving buyers, like it's like the best way to sell your company. You're saying like, hey, this is kind of, I've just never tried these things. I don't have experience in these things, but these could be potential opportunities. And just from personal experience, that was kind of how I positioned business apps for sale. I was very honest with the things that I had done, I hadn't done, the things I was thinking about doing. One was a pricing change model where we actually, went through a big Excel sheet of how I would run it. And those things, again, really like you look at it from a buyer perspective and you say, there's a lot of potential here that just hasn't been tapped into. And so I'm going to pursue this acquisition opportunity.
One more question on the MicroAcquire front, and then I want to jump back to something with you personally. So I saw recently that you had managed to secure acquire.com, great domain name, by the way. So congratulations
Thank you.
on your acquisition. So what's the story there? Why the name change and what's driving that?
Yeah, definitely. So, as MicroAcquire has grown, we facilitate multi-million dollar acquisitions all the time. And so we really want to, show just the startup ecosystem, the company that we're maturing into. We're not just for micro acquisitions. We always kind of do this wordplay like we have the domain macro acquire and micro acquire. And so I always like to say, whether you want to sell your business for 10K or up to 100 million, we have buyers that can facilitate that. So I felt the micro was just a little limiting
Yeah,
in terms of who we're selling to. And then candidly, a lot of founders don't want a micro
yeah,
acquisition.
yeah,
They may
exactly.
want to sell their business for the maximum amount as possible. And I think that subtle micro can
Acquire has
another
got, it's
thing.
got a powerful name to it, and that's a great. That sounds like a multi-billion-dollar business, and so it's
Yeah, it
exciting,
gives
man.
trust and credibility. But I think more importantly too, micro means so many different things to so many different people. Like might be 1K, 10K, 100K, 10
Mm,
million, depending on who
yeah,
you
full
are. And
perspective,
so by
right?
dropping that, our hope is, we, kind of are able to market and, message ourselves and
Like
position ourselves
the
to,
micro acquires, like the Elon Musk pocket change, like the $10 million acquisition for him, versus
well,
that's
I mean, I think a good example is, the banker that, sent me an email like, "We do these,"
yeah,
because he saw the
exactly.
micro, and it's like, we can do these acquisitions too. And so, I think, without the micro in our name, we'll just be able to help that many more
Yeah.
founders, and that's really just the ultimate goal of MicroAcquire.
Well, that's great. Again, I'm excited for you. So and you and the rest of the team, obviously. So I have one last final question for you. You've communicated today about how you were, a young entrepreneur. It sounds like you were a teenager even when you started business apps. If you think about the leader that you were then versus the leader and founder and entrepreneur and CEO you are today, what's the biggest thing that's changed for you?
That's a great question. I would say, well, when I was running business apps, I made every mistake you could possibly make. And, fortunately, you learn a lot from, failure and mistakes. And the biggest mistake I made with running business apps, just being so young, was not hiring people smarter than me early enough, not delegating, just being working way too much in the business and not on the business. And so, now when I think of growing MicroAcquire, I'm always, instead of thinking of how can I fix this problem, I'm thinking of how can I find someone smarter than myself to not just fix the problem, but make it better? And so I never have to think about it. So I think of myself more, I work more on the business than say in the business, but I do like to lead by example. I do like to,
Mm,
I feel the best leaders work for their teams, not the other way
mm,
around. But I'd say that's the biggest change, is just being aware that, there's a saying that I really like where, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so
mm,
I'd say today the biggest difference is, my focus on team building, culture, alignment around strategy, and just
mm,
clear delegation as well. Because as a founder, you can't be involved in every decision. You got to trust your
mm.
team.
I really love that as a sound bite. It's well said, and basically saying, look, some founders, I think, pride themselves, and even just leaders. You don't have to be an entrepreneur for this to apply, but pride themselves to be able to roll up their sleeves and get in there and work in the business, to quote you. But I think people need to be more focused on working on the business, the broader vision, the broader strategy, and you can't be tucked in there at every moment. And again, and well said. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So that's a great sentiment as well. What a great place to kind of wrap up today's episode. I think there's some great insightful points of view there. So thank you so much. If people want to follow you or engage with you or learn more about you, where should they be doing that?
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter, A Gazdecki, if you can spell that, or just LinkedIn, or just shoot me an email, Andrew at MicroAcquire. Happy to help any founders that may have questions about selling the business, growing their business. I'm a startup nerd, so don't hesitate to reach out.
I really enjoyed the chat. I'm sure anyone listening, whether they tuned in live or tuned in the post show, watching on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or listening to the audio version of our podcast on any of the platforms we stream on, from Apple to Google and beyond. I think we'll really enjoy today's episode. I certainly really enjoyed chatting with you. I hope we get a chance to meet in person one day. You seem like you'd be a great company, and from one entrepreneur to another, I really salute everything you're doing for the community. So mad respect. Thanks again, Andrew. I appreciate you coming today, and thanks again, everyone, for supporting and listening to our ship every week.
Yeah. Freddie, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it. And likewise, man, I'm rooting for you.
Thanks, man. Thanks, everyone. See you next week on O Ship.